The dust hung thick in the air as Eleanor Whitmore arranged her late husband's pocket watch on the weathered wooden table, her hands trembling not from grief alone but from the gnawing fear of starvation that had become her constant companion in Central City, Colorado Territory, this summer of 1876. She had already sold the livestock, the wagon, and most of the furniture from the small house that Thomas had built with his own hands 3 years before the fever took him last winter, leaving her alone at 23 with nothing but memories and mounting debts to the mercantile that threatened to swallow what little dignity she had left. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift sale she had organized in front of the general store, where passers-by could examine the remnants of her married life spread out like bones picked clean by vultures. There was Thomas's rifle, the one he had used to hunt deer in the mountains, providing meat through 2 harsh winters. His leather saddlebags, still bearing the scent of tobacco and saddle soap. The quilt her mother had sewn for their wedding, its pattern of interlocking rings symbolizing eternal love that had proven far too brief. A set of tin plates and cups. Thomas's good Sunday boots. The Bible his grandmother had given them. Even the carved wooden horse he had been making for the child they had hoped to have, left unfinished when his hands grew too weak to hold the knife. Eleanor wore her only remaining dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days, patched at the elbows and let out at the seams as many times as her sewing skills would allow. Her auburn hair, once her pride, was pulled back in a severe bun, though wisps escaped to frame a face made gaunt by too many meals skipped so the money could go toward keeping the roof over her head for 1 more week. Her green eyes, which Thomas had always said reminded him of spring meadows, now held the hollow look of someone who had accepted that hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The first hour brought only curious glances and pitying looks from the townspeople who passed by. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house stopped to examine the quilt, running her fingers over the careful stitches, but ultimately shook her head and moved on. The blacksmith's apprentice picked up the rifle, checked the barrel, and set it down without making an offer. Eleanor felt each rejection like a physical blow, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Pride was another luxury she was learning to abandon. "How much for the watch?" a gruff voice asked, and Eleanor looked up to see old Mr. Peterson, who ran the livery stable. He was holding Thomas's pocket watch, the silver catching the sunlight. $5, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Thomas had treasured that watch. It had belonged to his father and his father before him. "I will give you 2, Mr. Peterson said, not unkindly. "It is a good watch, but times are hard for everyone." Eleanor wanted to argue to defend the watch's worth, but she could see in his eyes that $2 was likely all she would get from anyone. She nodded, and he counted out the coins into her palm. The watch disappeared into his vest pocket, and with it went another piece of Thomas, another piece of the life she had built and lost. The sun climbed higher, and Eleanor sold the tin plates to a young couple newly arrived in Central City, hoping to make their fortune in the silver mines that had given the town its purpose. She sold the saddlebags to a freight driver passing through. The Bible went to the preacher's wife for $1, though Eleanor suspected it was charity more than necessity that motivated the purchase. By noon, she had made $11, enough to pay part of what she owed the mercantile, but not enough to secure her future beyond another few weeks. She was carefully folding the quilt, preparing to lower her asking price, when she heard the sound of spurs on the boardwalk. Looking up, she saw a cowboy approaching, tall and lean, with the dust of the trail on his clothes and the easy, rolling gait of a man who spent more time in the saddle than on his feet. He wore a dark brown hat pushed back on his head, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by wind and sun. His eyes, a striking blue-gray that seemed to take in everything at once, settled on her table of goods with interest. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "These items for sale?" "Yes, sir," Eleanor replied, straightening her shoulders. "All priced to sell." He moved along the table slowly, picking up each item and examining it with the careful attention of someone who knew quality when he saw it. He tested the weight of the rifle, checked the action, and nodded approvingly. He opened Thomas's boots and inspected the stitching. He ran his calloused fingers over the carved wooden horse, and Eleanor saw something flicker in his expression, though it was gone too quickly for her to identify. "You are selling all of this?" he asked, setting down the horse and turning to look at her directly. "I am," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "My husband passed last winter. I have debts to settle." The cowboy's expression softened with understanding rather than pity, which Eleanor appreciated more than he could know. "I am sorry for your loss, madam." "What is your name, if you do not mind my asking?" "Eleanor Whitmore," she said. "And yours?" "Lucas Yates," he replied. "I have been working cattle drives up from Texas, and I just finished a run to the railroad in Denver. I was thinking about settling in this area for a spell." Eleanor nodded politely, unsure why he was sharing this information but grateful for the conversation nonetheless. Most people in town had stopped talking to her beyond necessary pleasantries, as though widowhood were contagious or somehow shameful. "How much for everything here?" Lucas asked, gesturing to the table. Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Everything?" "Yes, madam, the whole lot." She quickly calculated the prices she had marked for each item, her heart beginning to beat faster. $43 for what remains," she said, then added hastily, "but I am willing to negotiate on some pieces." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. Without hesitation, he counted out $43 in coins and bills, placing them in a neat stack on the corner of the table. Eleanor stared at the money, more than she had seen at one time since Thomas died, enough to pay her debts and have something left over for food and rent. "Sir, are you certain?" she asked, hardly daring to believe her fortune. "I am certain, Mrs. Whitmore," Lucas said with a slight smile. "A man needs goods to set up a household, and these are fine quality. Your husband had good taste." "He did," Eleanor agreed softly, feeling an unexpected sting of tears that she firmly blinked away. "He built our home with his own hands, piece by piece." Lucas began gathering the items, loading them into his arms with practiced efficiency. "I have a horse and pack mule just down at the livery. Let me take these there, and then I will be back if you need any help." "Thank you, Mr. Yates," Eleanor said, clutching the money to her chest. "You have been very kind." He tipped his hat again and walked away, his arms full of Thomas's possessions, of Eleanor's past life packed up and carried off by a stranger. She watched him go, feeling the peculiar emptiness that came with necessary loss. The money in her hands represented survival, but the price was the final severing of her connection to the man she had loved and the future they had planned together. Eleanor used part of the money to settle her account at the mercantile, enduring Mr. Garrett's disapproving scowl as he marked her ledger paid in full. She bought flour, beans, a small amount of salt pork, and coffee, luxuries she had gone without for weeks. The weight of the parcels in her arms felt like wealth itself as she made her way back toward the small house at the edge of town. She was nearly home when she saw Lucas Yates standing on her front porch, the items she had sold him stacked neatly beside the door. Eleanor stopped in her tracks, confusion flooding through her. "Mr. Yates," she called out, hurrying forward as quickly as her parcels would allow. "Is something wrong? Did you change your mind about the purchase?" Lucas turned to face her, and in the afternoon light, she could see his expression clearly, open and earnest in a way that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "No, madam, I have not changed my mind. I bought these items fair and square." "Then why are they on my porch?" Eleanor asked, setting down her parcels with shaking hands. "Because they belong to you," Lucas said simply. "I am giving them back." Eleanor felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. "I do not understand. You paid good money for them." "I did," Lucas agreed. "And now they are mine to do with as I please. I please to give them back to you, Mrs. Whitmore." "But why?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising with a mixture of confusion, hope, and fear. "Why would you do such a thing?" Lucas took off his hat and held it in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "May I be honest with you, madam, please?" Eleanor whispered. "I lost my own family 5 years ago," Lucas said, his voice quiet but steady. "My parents, my 2 younger sisters, and my brother all died of cholera in a town not much different from this one. I was 19, working a cattle drive, and by the time I got the news and made it home, they were already buried. The townspeople had sold off everything we owned to pay for the funerals, and the debts my father had accumulated. I did not even have my mother's wedding ring to remember her by." Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears for this stranger's loss. "I swore then," Lucas continued, "that if I ever had the means and the opportunity, I would help someone else keep what mattered to them. When I saw you selling these things, saw the look in your eyes like you were cutting pieces of your own heart away, I knew this was that opportunity." "Mr. Yates, I cannot accept this," Eleanor said, even as her heart yearned to reach for the possessions that meant so much more than their monetary value. "It is too much. You do not even know me." "I know you loved your husband," Lucas said. "I know you are trying to survive with dignity in a world that does not make it easy for a woman alone. I know you deserve better than to lose everything that matters because of circumstances beyond your control." Eleanor sank down onto the porch steps, her legs no longer able to support her. The tears came then, hot and fast, all the grief and fear and exhaustion of the past months pouring out in great, shuddering sobs. Lucas sat down beside her, not touching her but offering his presence, his silent understanding of loss and the cruel mathematics of survival. When Eleanor finally regained her composure, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned to look at Lucas. "You are a good man, Lucas Yates, better than most I have known." "I am just a man who has been where you are," Lucas said, "and who has been fortunate enough to earn more than I need for myself." "Let me pay you back," Eleanor said. "It might take time, but I will find work. I can cook and clean and sew. I will repay every cent." Lucas shook his head firmly. "This is not a loan, Mrs. Whitmore. It is a gift, freely given. Though if you are looking for work, I did hear Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house saying she needed help with the cooking and laundry. She caters to the miners, and there are more coming in every week with the new strikes up in the hills." Eleanor nodded slowly, hope beginning to kindle in her chest like a carefully tended flame. "I will go see her tomorrow." "Good," Lucas said, standing and offering her his hand to help her up. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a working man, and Eleanor felt an unexpected flutter of awareness at the contact. "Now, let me help you get these things back inside where they belong." Together, they carried the items into the small house. Eleanor directed Lucas where to place things, and slowly, the home began to look less empty, more like the place she and Thomas had made together. When the rifle was mounted over the fireplace and the quilt was spread across the bed, Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "Thank you," she said again, as Lucas prepared to leave. "I do not know how I will ever properly thank you for what you have done." "No thanks are needed," Lucas said, "but I would consider it a kindness if you would allow me to call on you sometime. Not as anything improper," he added quickly, seeing her eyes widen, "but as a friend. I do not know many people in Central City, and it would be nice to have someone to talk to now and then." Eleanor hesitated. It had only been 8 months since Thomas died, and she was not sure what the town would say about her entertaining callers so soon. But Lucas had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than most people had in the entire time since she had become a widow. And more than that, she found she wanted to know more about this man who had given away $43 to a stranger out of nothing more than compassion and understanding. "I would like that," Eleanor said finally. "You would be welcome to call on me, Mr. Yates." "Lucas, please," he said with that slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Mr. Yates was my father." "Then you must call me Eleanor," she replied, finding herself smiling back despite everything. Lucas touched his hat brim in farewell and left, his footsteps echoing on the wooden porch and then fading into the dusty street. Eleanor stood in her doorway, watching him go, and felt for the first time in months that perhaps there was still something to hope for in this world. True to his word, Lucas came calling 3 days later, arriving in the early evening with a string of fresh trout he had caught in the creek that ran down from the mountains. Eleanor invited him in and fried the fish with some of the flour and salt pork she had bought, and they ate together at her small table as the sun set outside the window. "Mrs. Henderson hired me," Eleanor told him, pleased to share the good news. "I start tomorrow, cooking breakfast and dinner for her boarders and doing the washing twice a week. The pay is not much, but it is steady, and she said if I do well, she might give me room and board as part of the wage." "That is wonderful," Lucas said warmly. "Mrs. Henderson runs a good establishment. You will be treated fairly there." "What about you?" Eleanor asked. "Have you found work?" Lucas nodded. "I hired on at the Copper King mine as a timberman shoring up the tunnels. It is steady work and pays well enough. I am also helping the livery owner in the evenings with breaking horses. He is getting too old for the rough work, and I have a way with animals." They talked easily, discovering common ground in their experiences of loss and resilience. Lucas told her about growing up in Missouri, learning to ride almost before he could walk, and how the cattle drives had taught him the geography of the West better than any map. Eleanor shared stories about Thomas, how they had met at a church social in Kansas, how he had courted her with wildflowers and terrible poetry that made her laugh, how they had come to Colorado territory full of dreams about the future. "You think you will stay here?" Lucas asked as the evening drew to a close. "In Central City, I mean." Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I do not know. Thomas wanted to build something permanent here, and part of me wants to honor that. But another part of me thinks perhaps I should start fresh somewhere else, where I am not always known as the widow, where I could just be Eleanor again." "I understand that feeling," Lucas said. "After my family died, I could not stay in Missouri. Everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts. The cattle drives gave me a purpose, a reason to keep moving. But now I think I am ready to stop moving to put down roots somewhere." "Why here?" Eleanor asked. "There are many towns in the territory, many places a skilled man could make a life." Lucas was quiet for a moment, his blue-gray eyes thoughtful. "I suppose because this is where I happened to be when I decided it was time to stop running, and because I met someone here who reminded me that there are still good reasons to build a future." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the dimness of the lamplight. She knew he meant her, knew that something was growing between them, tentative and new but real nonetheless. It felt too soon, too fast, but it also felt right in a way she could not quite explain. Over the following weeks, Lucas became a regular presence in Eleanor's life. He would stop by after his shift at the mine, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers he had picked on his way down the mountain, a sack of apples from the orchard outside town, a book of poems he thought she might enjoy. Eleanor found herself looking forward to his visits, preparing extra portions of the dinner she made for herself so she would have something to offer him. The town noticed, of course. Mrs. Henderson mentioned to Eleanor that people were talking, not unkindly but with speculation about the widow and the cowboy who had caught her eye. Eleanor tried not to care what people thought, but she had lived in small towns long enough to know that reputation mattered, especially for a woman alone. "Do you think I am being improper?" she asked Lucas one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Allowing you to call on me so soon after Thomas passed?" Lucas turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I think you are a grown woman who has survived more hardship in the past year than many people face in a lifetime. I think you have earned the right to decide for yourself what is proper and what is not." "But what will people say?" Eleanor pressed. "People will always find something to say," Lucas replied. "The question is whether you are going to let their words dictate how you live your life. Your husband is gone, and that is a tragedy. But you are still here, still alive. You have the right to find happiness again, Eleanor. You have the right to friendship, to companionship, to whatever brings light into your life." Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the guilt she had been carrying like a yoke across her shoulders. "Thomas would have liked you," she said softly. "He always said that character mattered more than anything else, and you have more character than any man I have met." "I wish I could have known him," Lucas said. "Any man who inspired such loyalty and love must have been someone special." As the summer deepened into autumn, Eleanor and Lucas's friendship deepened into something more. It happened gradually, in small moments that accumulated like gold dust in a prospector's pan. The way Lucas's hand would steady her elbow when they walked together on the uneven boardwalks. The way Eleanor would save the best portions of her cooking for him. The way they could sit in comfortable silence, needing no words to feel connected. The first time Lucas kissed her, it was late September, and the aspens on the mountainsides had turned to gold. They had hiked up to a meadow above town, where the air was crisp and clean and the view stretched for miles. Eleanor had been exclaiming over the beauty of the changing leaves when she turned and found Lucas watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You," Lucas said simply. "You are beautiful when you smile like that. You should smile more often." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, though they were not tears of sadness. "You make me want to smile again." "I did not think I would ever feel this way after Thomas died." "Eleanor," Lucas said, taking her hand in his. "I know it has not been long. I know people will judge. But I need you to know that I have fallen in love with you, completely and irrevocably in love with you. And if you need me to wait, if you need more time, I will wait as long as you need. But I had to tell you the truth of my heart." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honesty and hope. She thought about Thomas, about the love they had shared, and knew without doubt that he would want her to be happy. He had been a generous man, big-hearted and kind, and he would not want her to spend the rest of her life alone out of some misplaced sense of obligation to his memory. "I love you too," Eleanor whispered. "I did not expect it, did not think it was possible so soon, but my heart knows what it feels, and it feels love when I am with you." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms gentle against her skin, and kissed her with a tenderness that made Eleanor feel cherished and precious. It was different from kissing Thomas, but not less. Just different. A new chapter in her life rather than a betrayal of the old one. They were married in November, in a simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Henderson and a few of Lucas's co-workers from the mine as witnesses. Eleanor wore a new dress that Lucas had insisted on buying for her, a deep green that matched her eyes. Lucas wore his best shirt and a string tie, his hair freshly cut and his face clean-shaven. The preacher who performed the ceremony had also presided over Thomas's funeral, and Eleanor saw the question in his eyes about the speed of her remarriage. But when he looked at Lucas, saw the way the younger man gazed at Eleanor with such obvious devotion, the preacher's expression softened. "Love is a gift from God," he said as part of the ceremony. "It is not something to be questioned or measured or judged by calendars and conventions. It simply is, and we are blessed when we find it. Lucas Yates, you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." "I do," Lucas said, his voice strong and sure. "Eleanor Whitmore, you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." Eleanor looked at Lucas, at the man who had given her back not just her possessions but her hope, her future, her belief that good things could still happen in a hard world. "I do," she said clearly. They moved into a larger house on the better side of town, which Lucas rented with money he had saved from the cattle drives and his work at the mine. Eleanor continued working for Mrs. Henderson through the winter, and Lucas took on extra jobs where he could find them. They were saving for a piece of land outside town, a place where they could build something permanent, maybe run cattle or horses. Their first winter together was hard in some ways, with deep snows that shut down the mine for weeks at a time and bitter cold that crept through every gap in the walls. But Eleanor had never been happier. She and Lucas would sit by the fire in the evenings, talking about their dreams for the future, or reading aloud from books they borrowed from the small library the town had recently established. Lucas was a patient and considerate husband, always concerned for Eleanor's comfort and happiness. He brought her coffee in bed on cold mornings before he left for work. He insisted she keep the money she earned for herself, refusing to take it for household expenses. He listened when she talked about Thomas, understanding that her first husband would always hold a place in her heart and that his memory did not diminish what she felt for Lucas. In turn, Eleanor learned about Lucas's own ghosts, the family he had lost, and the years of loneliness that had followed. She learned that he sometimes woke in the night from dreams of the cholera epidemic, of arriving home too late to say goodbye. She would hold him in those moments, offering the same comfort he had given her, and gradually the nightmares came less frequently. Spring arrived with a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers, and with it came news that would change their lives. Eleanor had been feeling unwell for several weeks, tired and queasy, and when she finally confided in Mrs. Henderson, the older woman smiled knowingly. "My dear, I think you are expecting," Mrs. Henderson said gently. Eleanor's hand went to her stomach, her eyes widening. "Are you certain? I have helped deliver enough babies in this town to recognize the signs," Mrs. Henderson said. "You should see the doctor, but I would wager my best cooking pot that I am right." The doctor confirmed Mrs. Henderson's suspicion, and Eleanor walked home in a daze of joy and fear. She had wanted children with Thomas, but it had never happened, and she had begun to think perhaps it was not meant to be. Now, at 24, she was going to be a mother, but with Lucas instead of the man she had originally imagined raising children with. When she told Lucas that evening, his reaction erased any doubts she might have had. His face lit up with such pure happiness that Eleanor felt her own joy double in response. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down with a look of concern. "I am sorry, I should not have done that. Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" "We are fine," Eleanor assured him, laughing at his sudden caution. "I am not made of glass, Lucas." "You are carrying our child," Lucas said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You are carrying the future. That makes you more precious than anything in this world." They spent that evening making plans, talking about names and where to put a cradle, and how they would need to save even more money now because a baby needed so many things. Lucas was adamant that Eleanor should stop working for Mrs. Henderson, but Eleanor negotiated a compromise. She would continue helping with the cooking but would give up the heavy work of laundry and cleaning. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Eleanor's belly grew round and full, and Lucas treated her like fragile treasure, always ready to help her with anything that required reaching or lifting or bending. The townspeople who had initially whispered about the quick remarriage now cooed over Eleanor's condition and offered advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and predictions about whether the child would be a boy or a girl. In late October, with the aspens turning gold once again, Eleanor went into labor. Mrs. Henderson and the doctor attended the birth, which was long and difficult but ultimately successful. Lucas paced outside the bedroom door for hours, refusing to leave despite Mrs. Henderson's suggestion that he go to the saloon or the livery to distract himself. When Mrs. Henderson finally opened the door and invited him in, Lucas entered to find Eleanor propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, with a small bundle in her arms. She smiled at him, that brilliant smile he had first seen in the meadow when he told her he loved her. "Come meet your son," Eleanor said softly. Lucas approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small, mewling sounds that seemed impossibly loud for something so small. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas, honoring Eleanor's first husband, with Lucas as his middle name. When some of the townspeople expressed surprise at the choice, Lucas explained simply, "Thomas Whitmore gave Eleanor her first taste of love and happiness. He built the home where I met her, where I fell in love with her. Our son carries his name with pride and gratitude." Eleanor loved Lucas even more for that generosity of spirit, for understanding that honoring her past did not diminish their present. Little Thomas, as they called him to distinguish him from his namesake, became the center of their world. He was a good baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and Lucas proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with the infant. The following spring, Lucas finally found the piece of land he had been looking for. 40 acres along Clear Creek, with good grass, water, and a stand of timber perfect for building. He bought it with the money they had saved, and immediately began planning the house he would build, this time with Eleanor's input on every detail. "I want a big kitchen," Eleanor said, "with windows that look out over the creek. And a bedroom on the ground floor for us with a room next to it for babies, and a loft upstairs for when the children get older." "Children?" Lucas asked with a grin. "Plural, how many are we planning on?" "At least 3 or 4, Eleanor said, matching his grin. "Maybe more if we are blessed. This land is big enough for a large family." "Then that is what we will have," Lucas agreed, pulling her into his arms and kissing the top of her head while Thomas played at their feet with wooden blocks Lucas had carved. Building the house took most of the summer, with Lucas working on it whenever he was not at the mine. Several of his friends from town came out on Sundays to help, and gradually the frame rose, then the walls, then the roof. By September, the house was complete enough to move into, though the finish work would continue for months. The house was larger and finer than anything Eleanor had lived in before, with glass windows and a real wood floor and a stone fireplace Lucas had built with his own hands. Eleanor arranged their furniture, including all the pieces that had belonged to her and Thomas, and the house became a home, filled with the sounds of family and life. That winter, Eleanor became pregnant again, and in the summer of their 3rd year of marriage she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. 2 years later, another daughter arrived whom they called Margaret. Then came another son, James, and finally, when Eleanor was 30, a 4th child, a surprise baby they named Elizabeth. The ranch prospered as Lucas expanded from horses to cattle, buying a small herd and gradually building it up through careful management and hard work. Eleanor kept a large garden and sold eggs and butter in town, contributing to the family income while managing the household and raising 4 active children. The years passed in a blur of work and love, and the ordinary miracles of watching children grow. Thomas became a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for the animals. Sarah inherited her mother's green eyes and her father's way with horses. Margaret was the scholar, always with her nose in a book. James was fearless and adventurous, keeping Eleanor in a constant state of worry. And Elizabeth, the baby, was the sweet-natured peacemaker who could charm anyone into anything. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Eleanor with a trip back to Central City, just the 2 of them, leaving the children in the care of Mrs. Henderson, who had become like a grandmother to them. They stayed at the boarding house, in the same room Lucas had rented when he first came to town, and walked the streets where they had met. The town had grown and changed, with more permanent buildings replacing the rough structures of the mining camp days. But the general store where Eleanor had sold her possessions was still there, looking much the same. "You remember?" Lucas asked as they stood on the boardwalk in front of it. "I remember thinking my life was over," Eleanor said, leaning against his side. "I remember feeling like I had nothing left to lose because I had already lost everything that mattered." "And now?" Lucas asked, his arm around her waist. "Now I have everything," Eleanor said, looking up at him. "I have you and our children and a home I never dreamed I could have. You gave me back my possessions that day, but more than that, you gave me back my life. You gave me a reason to hope again." "You gave me a reason to stop running," Lucas replied. "You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving. You made me believe that good things could still happen, that love could still be found even after loss." They kissed there on the boardwalk, not caring who might see, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of grief and built something beautiful together. The years continued to unfold, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow that makes up a life. There were hard winters when the cattle struggled and lean times when money was tight. There was the year Sarah broke her arm falling from a horse, and the terrifying week when James caught pneumonia, and they feared they might lose him. There was the sadness of Mrs. Henderson's death when Eleanor was 35, taking with her one of the last links to the early days in Central City. But there were far more moments of happiness than sorrow. There were harvest dances and church socials and 4th of July celebrations. There were Christmas mornings with the children tearing into presents and Easter Sundays with new dresses and suits. There were summer evenings on the porch, watching fireflies and listening to the creek. There were the quiet moments in bed at night, talking over the day's events or simply lying in comfortable silence, Lucas's hand in Eleanor's, their bodies fitting together as naturally as breathing. Thomas, their eldest, grew into a fine young man who shared his father's skill with horses and his mother's kindness. At 21, he married a schoolteacher from Denver, a smart young woman named Catherine who won the whole family's approval. They settled on a piece of the ranch that Lucas deeded to them, building their own house and starting their own family. Sarah, true to her nature, became a renowned horse trainer, one of the few women in the territory to make a living at such work. She married later than her sisters, at 27, to a veterinarian who shared her love of animals. Margaret became a teacher, fulfilling Eleanor's secret dream of education, and married a newspaperman. James, after giving his parents several gray hairs with his youthful adventures, finally settled down as a deputy sheriff in Central City. Elizabeth, the youngest, fell in love with a young doctor and moved to Denver, though she visited frequently. Lucas and Eleanor watched their children grow and leave with the bittersweet pride of parents who had done their job well. The house that had once echoed with the sounds of children at play grew quieter, though never empty, as grandchildren began to arrive and fill the rooms with laughter again. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Eleanor back to the meadow above Central City, where he had first told her he loved her. They were both older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines on their faces that spoke of years lived fully. But when Lucas looked at Eleanor, he still saw the beautiful young widow with green eyes and auburn hair, and when Eleanor looked at Lucas, she still saw the cowboy who had given her back more than possessions. "You have any regrets?" Lucas asked as they sat on a blanket, looking out over the valley below. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I regret that Thomas died so young that he never got to see the life I have lived. But I do not regret loving you or the family we have built or the choices we have made. You taught me that it is possible to honor the past while still embracing the future. You taught me that love is not a finite resource," Lucas said. "That you can love someone new without forgetting someone old. That the heart has room enough for all the people who matter." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. Then Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Eleanor, and when she unwrapped it, she found Thomas Whitmore's pocket watch, the one she had sold all those years ago. "How?" Eleanor breathed, turning the watch over in her hands. It was the same one, she was certain of it, with the tiny dent on the back where Thomas had dropped it once. "I tracked down Mr. Peterson 5 years ago," Lucas explained. "He had sold it to a man in Denver, and I spent 3 years finding that man and convincing him to sell it back. I wanted you to have it, to be able to pass it on to our Thomas when the time comes." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of gratitude and love rather than grief. "You did this for me, spent years searching for it. I would do anything for you," Lucas said simply. "You know that." Eleanor set the watch carefully aside and threw her arms around her husband, holding him tight. "I love you, Lucas Yates. I have loved you since the day you stood on my porch with all my possessions and gave them back to me. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Eleanor Yates," Lucas replied, holding her just as tightly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, the answer to prayers I did not know how to pray." They held each other as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. Two people who had found each other at the right moment in the right place, and built a life that honored both their pasts and their present. The years continued to roll forward, as years do. Lucas and Eleanor grew older together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They sold most of the cattle operation to Thomas and his sons, keeping just enough animals to make them feel useful. They spent their days working in the garden, receiving visits from children and grandchildren, and sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. Lucas was 68 and Eleanor 67, when Lucas had a heart attack while mending a fence. He survived it, but it left him weakened, and they both knew that their time together was entering its final chapter. Eleanor tended him with the same devotion he had always shown her, and Lucas accepted her care with gratitude. "I am not afraid to die," Lucas told Eleanor one evening as they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "I have lived a good life, loved and been loved, seen my children grow and thrive. If my time comes soon, I will go peacefully." "I am not ready to lose you," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I know I am being selfish, but I cannot imagine waking up without you beside me." "You will not have to imagine it for long," Lucas said with a small smile. "We have been together for so many years now, Eleanor. Our hearts beat in rhythm. When mine stops, I do not think yours will want to go on much longer." "Do not say such things," Eleanor protested. "It is not morbid, my love. It is beautiful. We have been so intertwined for so long that we have become one person in two bodies. That is what true love looks like." Lucas lived for another 3 years, slowly declining but never losing his mental sharpness or his appreciation for the life he had lived. He died peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night, with Eleanor beside him holding his hand. His last words, spoken in a whisper, were, "Thank you for everything." Eleanor grieved, but it was a different grief than she had felt when Thomas died. She had been young then, unprepared for loss, with a whole life stretching ahead that suddenly seemed impossibly empty. Now she was 70, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her, with a lifetime of memories that no amount of grief could erase. She missed Lucas with an ache that went bone deep, but she also felt a quiet certainty that their separation was temporary. She lived for 2 more years, spending time with family, telling stories about Lucas and Thomas and the early days in Central City. She gave the pocket watch to her son Thomas, along with the quilt her mother had sewn and the carved wooden horse that Lucas had restored and finished all those years ago. She made sure each of her children had something meaningful, some piece of the life she and Lucas had built together. On a warm spring morning, Eleanor did not wake up. She died as peacefully as Lucas had in her sleep, with a smile on her face, as though she were dreaming of something wonderful. Her children found her that way, and took comfort in the peaceful expression, in the knowledge that she had lived fully and loved deeply, and was now reunited with the 2 men who had shaped her life. They buried her beside Lucas on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Eleanor Yates, beloved wife of Lucas Yates and widow of Thomas Whitmore. She loved well and was well loved in return." On Lucas's headstone, which had stood alone for 2 years, the inscription read, "Lucas Yates, who gave everything and asked nothing in return, beloved husband, father, and friend." The ranch continued, passing down through the generations. Thomas Whitmore Yates, the eldest son, ran it with the same careful attention his father had shown, and when he grew old, he passed it to his own children. The house Lucas built stood strong through decades of Colorado weather, and inside it, new families were raised, new love stories unfolded, new lives began. The story of Eleanor and Lucas became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays. The story of the widow who was selling her last possessions, and the cowboy who bought them all and gave them back. The story of 2 people who found love in the midst of loss and built something beautiful that lasted generations. The story of how sometimes The right person arrives at exactly the right moment, not to replace what was lost, but to help carry the weight of grief and build something new and wonderful from the ruins. And in the telling and retelling, the story became more than just history. It became a reminder that love can be found even in the darkest times, that kindness matters, that giving freely is its own reward, that the human heart has infinite capacity for love, for joy, for resilience in the face of hardship, that happy endings are possible even when all seems lost. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century. The Wild West gave way to modernity, with cars replacing horses and electricity replacing kerosene lamps. Central City changed from a rough mining town to a tourist attraction, with people coming to see what remained of the old days. But on the ranch that Lucas built and Eleanor made a home, his descendants still lived and worked the land, still told the story of their great-great-grandparents who had loved each other so well. The pocket watch was still carefully preserved, passed down through the generations along with the quilt and the carved horse and the Bible and all the other items that Lucas had bought and returned on that fateful day in 1876. They were more than possessions now. They were talismans, physical reminders of a love story that had rippled through time, affecting not just Eleanor and Lucas, but all the lives that came after them.